Hello, my friends across the fruited and rooted plain. It's time for another edition of the Gardening Simplified Show with the one and only Stacey and me, Rick Weiss. Stacey, how are you?
I'm doing great, Rick. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great because it's fall, and fall is one of my favorite times to garden. And by the way, I love the plant you've picked out for us today because when people think fall gardening, they often think of mums. Mumbelievable, mamma mia. Mum's the word, right? All that shtick.
Yeah, my husband was just asking me the other day, mums, how did that happen? Why are mums the thing for fall? And, I didn't really have a good answer for him. And then he asked me why we don't really plant them. And I do have a good answer for that. I think that the colors of mums are fantastic. I love how seasonal they are. But you know what I don't really like about mums?
What?
They don't have a lot of space in them. They're very clumpy.
Clumpy. Good gardening word. Clumpy.
They're just so stiff and they don't, they just kind of like, they're colorful and they just sit there and then they fade. And I want something with a little bit more, pizzazz, a little more dynamic experience as it goes through the fall, because fall is all about changes.
Absolutely. And color, right? And the plant that Stacey's going to introduce us to in the second segment, unreal color. So looking forward to that. Now, Stacey, unfortunately, in fall, it's a great time also to control weeds. And I've got a couple weeds on my mind this week. Nutsedge. Oh, I can see you cringing already. And pokeweed.
Oh, those are, those are two fascinating weeds. I have to confess here, I have a long-standing relationship with weeds. When I started working as a...
Take me to your weeder.
I mean, most of us who are in gardening do, but so weeding was my chore when I was a kid. I had to weed the beds, which was really stupid because my parents did not mulch the beds. There was nothing planted in the beds. I wasn't weeding flower beds. I was weeding beds that had nothing planted in them. So of course it was only weeds. So built up a lot of resentment there. Then when I started working landscaping in college...
We need to get this out. This is very good.
Sorry, Mom. But I'm sure she remembers. And then when I was in college and I was working as a landscaper, they were like, oh, great. This woman wants to join our crew. Guess we'll put her on the weeding duty. And so then I just spent all of my entire summer job as a landscaper weeding. But I will say, when you're weeding, you learn a lot about plants. Yeah. You get down dirty, up close and personal with those weeds, and you learn an awful lot about how plants grow. But the weeds that you just mentioned are two fascinating weeds. And I want to just talk about pokeweed first, because if there is one plant that people ask me about every single fall without fail, they'll be like, hey, I saw this thing the other day and it had these like fluorescent pink stems and these weird black berries. And what is that? And can I eat it? And the answer is no. I'm just going to get that right out of the way right now. Do not eat pokeweed berries. They are very noticeable right now, but you should not eat them.
Well, and there's a great history to the plant. I don't know if you've ever heard the song Poke Salad Annie.
I sure have.
1968 song written and performed by Tony Joe White, but of course Elvis Presley made it famous. And the poke salad, of course, refers to cooked pokeweed, and you have to be very careful how you cook them because they could make you sick.
It's actually an extremely toxic plant, and poke salad is only made in spring. So the pokeweed we're talking about now, it's in flower, it's in fruit, but the poke salad of the Poke Salad Annie fame is something that's eaten in spring when the plant first shoots up. But the berries and those stems, that pink of those stems is so distinctive. It just stands out a mile away. But even though we've been talking about how toxic they are and making these exceptions about edibles, what's edible about them, I learned a few years ago from someone at Gelito Seed that they sell pokeweed seed, particularly in Europe, because the berries are processed to make the ink that they use to stamp meat to indicate its grade.
No way.
Yeah, so just a tiny little bit of it. And they wouldn't have the seed, they would de-seed it. So it would just be that, because if you squish a pokeweed berry, you get a bright, black purpley stain on your fingers. And so it's very common, particularly he mentioned Poland, so I can't speak to other areas of Europe. But they actually harvest the pokeweed berries and make them into an ink, and they stamp that on the meat to say what grade it is.
Wow, fascinating. You know, what's fun for me has been over the years to watch people at this time of the year as we enter fall. The pokeweed is actually quite beautiful.
It is.
And some people have it growing in their landscapes. Maybe a bird planted it, right?
Most likely.
And they're now propagating it and fertilizing it and caring for it and talking to it and not knowing exactly what it is, but it can be quite beautiful.
It is. And, we were hiking here in Grand Haven last weekend, and I got a picture of it growing in the woods, and it just, it shines out like a beacon because that color is amazing. So if you are one of those people who has happens to have a pokeweed in your garden, it's okay to enjoy it, but you might want to do something about it before it goes to seed, because you probably don't necessarily want a whole bunch more pokeweed in your yard.
And speaking of going to seed, nutsedge, as we mentioned, when it goes to seed, that's a problem. Also, we've got the little nutlets on the roots, so if you start pulling it up, you're propagating it. But coming up in our news segment, our branching news segment, there's news about nutsedge and phytoplasmas, and you as a horticulturist, Stacey, I'm sure you know a lot more about phytoplasmas than I do. We always called them when a plant gets the yellows or something like that, but phytoplasma almost sounds like something you'd see in a Ghostbusters movie.
It does.
Right?
It does sound like that. And I have to say, I know a teensy little bit about phytoplasmas, but actually even, scientists don't know all that much about phytoplasmas because they are just extremely strange organisms. But Rick, I have a nutsedge confession.
Uh-oh.
And that is, I actually love pulling nutsedge.
Oh, so do I. So do I. That when you grab nutsedge by the base, it has this triangular type stem feel to it. And then when you pull it out, again, therapeutic.
Yeah, it's so satisfying because it comes out really nicely and you're holding on to that edge. And now if you are pulling nutsedge in fall, then you might not get that nutlet. So I was reading that spring and early summer is the time where you're most likely to get the nutlet. And the nutlet that we're referring to is basically it's not a seed. It's a little tiny bulb of the plant, and it does look like a nut. And that is where nutsedge, the common name, comes from. The botanical name of nutsedge is, I forgot the first part. But the species is esculentus. And when esculentus is in a botanical name, that denotes that it is edible.
Esculentus. That sounds like a resort I would go to in the Caribbean.
I believe the full botanical name is Cyperus esculentus. And it is actually edible. And many cultures do actually harvest those nutlets and make them into flowers and snacks. And when I say flour, I mean like flour that you would bake with, and snacks and all sorts of things like that. But of course, you have to get the little nutlet to be able to completely eradicate the nutsedge. Now, I pull it in fall, even if I'm not getting the nutlet, because I can't stand to look at it. And like we were talking about going to seed, you really don't want that nutsedge to go to seed, because then you're going to have a whole lot more nutsedge to deal with in the future. But if you are not familiar with nutsedge, we're going to help you out. All you have to do is go to our website, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. We will put pictures and some links in the show notes so you have all the resources that you need to identify and manage nutsedge in your own yard. If you are here in the West Michigan audience, you almost certainly have nutsedge in your yard or somewhere nearby. So it's a good thing to get to know.
I love that. And the website is there, show notes. Make sure to check it out, Stacey, because when it comes to weeds, we've got pull, right? Right.
I do. I was pulling a lot of nutsedge last week, so I'm definitely feeling it.
We're going to go to the mailbag today also in our third segment. Stacey, we want to encourage people again to make sure to email us.
Yes. Help at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, and that will come to us, and we will be able to get your question. And we have actual listener questions this week that I'm really excited to answer in the third segment.
Fantastic. Coming up next, Stacey's going to update us and bring us up to speed on a beautiful plant with beautiful fall color. That's next here on the Gardening Simplified Show.
Welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show with me, Stacey Hervella, and the one and only Rick Weist here in our studio. And it is time to put another plant on trial. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, well, today's plant on trial, of course, is a Proven Winners Color Choice shrub, and it is Proudberry Coralberry. Have you seen this plant?
I have seen it. Beautiful. And here's my question for you, Stacey, because you have to help me,
Okay.
along with all our other listening friends. Coralberry. I looked at the botanical name.
Yes.
Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
Symphoricarpos?
Symphoricarpos. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Boy, it rolls off your tongue, not mine.
And Symphoricarpos means to bring together the fruit. And if you see Proudberry coralberry or any coralberry, or actually snowberry, which it's also related to, it has these big sort of bubble-like berries that kind of clump into each other, like they've emerged together. But if you're wondering why we are talking about Proudberry coralberry now here in early autumn, it's because this is a plant that really comes into its own in autumn. And as wonderful as that is, if you are someone who grows it, it is actually a little bit of a detriment to this plant because, it looks amazing now, but when people are actually in the garden center in spring and early summer shopping, it looks lovely, but it doesn't look like all that much.
It's not very exciting.
It's
in
not
spring.
exciting. Yeah,
Right.
and there's a lot of other competition. You're seeing, roses in full bloom and all these other things that are just looking stunning. And here's, Proudberry coralberry with quite nice round blue-green foliage, but you're just kind of like, meh, are you really going to do that? But if you are the type of garden center shopper who has faith, you will be greatly rewarded by planting it because it looks amazing now. And so what it does is starting in late summer, it puts on these tiny sort of bell-like flowers. They start out green and then they turn pink. And those are in short order pollinated by insects. You don't need another pollinator. You don't need another plant. So you can just plant one Proudberry coralberry.
Good to know.
And it will bear fruit. And the fruit that develops, it does look just like big pink bubbles. That's the best way I can describe it.
I think that's a good description. Yes, it's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And it's, one thing I really love about it.
Is that why they call it Proudberry?
Well, it's called Proudberry because as if you're familiar with Proven Winners Color Choice shrubs, the director of marketing and new plant development, Tim Wood, is a big fan of classic rock.
Oh, very good. That's great.
So this would not be our only shrub that was named after a classic rock song. Just
I didn't
one
see
of many.
that coming, but that's great.
Yes. So big shrub, keep on turning. And it's actually not that big of a shrub. It's only probably about 3 to 5 feet tall and wide. But yes, Proudberry it is. And you will be proud of its berries because it does look really, really amazing when it flowers and comes into fruit. And we were talking about the color, and we talked about how pokeweed is fluorescent pink, and it is just like a stunning, jaw-dropping fluorescent pink. Proudberry is also pink, and it's a very, very bright pink. And what I love about these pinks that sort of develop in fall landscapes is that they're very unexpected.
Yeah.
People associate fall with reds and golds and oranges. And so when you get these pinks in there, they're not really clashing. Somehow, nature has its way. The color really works and feels at home and feels natural, but it's unexpected.
It does. Pink is such a great color in the landscape. It plays well with other colors. Pink can even go with fall colors like orange or blue. In my mind, I think it plays well with other colors, so it's a great addition to the landscape.
Well, I know we're putting plants on trial here and not colors, but I do want to say something that one of my coworkers, Jane Beggs-Joles, told me years ago when I started here, and that is something that she heard from a fashion designer, that hot pink is a neutral. There is really no color that hot pink doesn't go with.
A neutral.
A neutral. And if you sit down and think about it, it pretty much looks great with everything.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I agree.
It's a surprising thought, but so Proudberry is a great choice if you want some pink in your fall landscape. Now, on Plants in Trial, I like to talk about where the plant came from, how it came to us. And Proudberry coralberry was developed in the Netherlands. As so many woody ornamental plants are. The Netherlands, particularly back in the day, was really the world's hotbed of ornamental woody plant breeding. So annuals were being bred all over the world, but as far as like shrubs and early woody ornamentals like that, the Netherlands was pretty much it. So the Netherlands is where limelight hydrangea came from. The Netherlands is where wine and roses weigela came from. And it's also, of course, where Proudberry Symphoricarpos came from.
So not just tulips.
So much more than tulips. Yeah. And in fact, there is an area of the Netherlands called Boskoop, and I'm really sorry for any Dutch people who hear me and know that I'm mispronouncing that. But it is really the world center of woody plant nurseries. It is a small sort of village, but pretty much all it is nursery after nursery after nursery, and really talented plant breeders like Katarina Maria Hoekstra Aries, which is a mouthful, but she is the breeder.
What a great name. That's great.
She is the breeder of Proudberry Symphoricarpos. And I believe that this plant, even though it has tremendous landscape potential and value, very easy to grow, which we're going to get to next, was originally developed for the cut flower market. Because it makes an excellent cut stem. So I say cut flower, but of course what you're really cutting it for is the berries, right. Although the foliage makes a nice filler during the season as well. And it's a very, very popular element for flower arranging. It's quite long lasting in the vase. You can't dry it, but...
So a question for you, Stacey. This is a native plant. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a native plant. And as a native plant, it can get rather large. I've seen some people who refer to it as the devil's shoestrings.
But I've not heard that.
Yeah, devil's shoestrings, because it could get rather lengthy. But the great thing about Proudberry and this plant, you mentioned it initially, compact.
Yes. And so to go back to your question about Symphoricarpos being native, yes, Symphoricarpos is a North American native species. This particular variety has been hybridized from multiple species. So we wouldn't really call it a native because it has multiple layered parentage. But you will see, depending on where you're out in the woods and hiking, you will see some similar plants. And snowberry, like I mentioned earlier, is a Symphoricarpos that is native to North America. And yeah, that is one of the goals that plant breeders have is, it's not a question of improving on nature. That's not really what they set out to do. But it's a question of saying like, hey, I like this plant, but if I were to go take one from nature, well, first of all, I'd be taking one from nature, and that's not cool. And second of all, it would be huge and gangly and wouldn't really look good in my home landscape. So what plant breeders set out to do is to really refine a plant's habit so that it's at home in a more cultivated area like your home's landscape.
That's wonderful. We all need a little cultivation
and a little bit of refinement. We can all benefit from a touch of refinement. So let's move into how to grow Proudberry coralberry so you can make it a part of your own home landscape, especially if you're looking outside and thinking, this garden could use a little bit of pizzazz here in the fall. Nothing's happening. Everything's going dormant. I want something that's just like, hey, look at me. That would be Proudberry coralberry. So it is very, very hardy. It is hardy from USDA Zone 3, so that's quite cold. Not super heat tolerant, though. It's only going through about USDA Zone 7, which is somewhere around, say, like the central Virginia, southern Kentucky sort of area. So doesn't do super well outside of that zone. It just gets too hot and doesn't get the winter chill that it needs to set nice flower buds, or rather to grow well. And it grows in sun to shade, which is nice if you have a shady spot, because of course, those of you who have shade, I'm not one of you. All I have pretty much is sun. But if you have full shade, you don't necessarily have a lot of options. Now, if it's very, very deep shade, it's not going to flower and fruit as well, but you'll still get some flowers and fruit. So we're going to recommend anywhere from full sun, particularly if you're in a colder area, to partial sun. So say like 4 to 6 hours of sun each day, or filtered light all day. Super tolerant of any type of soil. No problems there. And guess what? Guess what, Rick?
What?
It's deer resistant.
Oh.
It really is.
Okay, sold. You got me right there.
And not one of those that's just kind of sort of deer resistant. So that is Proudberry Symphoricarpos on trial this week. If you want to learn more about it, all you need to do is go to gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. Check out the show notes. We'll have everything you need to know there. And we're going to take a break. But when we come back, we are going to open up the gardener's mailbag and hear what our listeners have to have on their minds. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show with Stacey Hervella and Rick Weiss. And you have joined us just in time for the opening of the garden mailbag.
Yay! And Stacey, first question today, Jill from Norton Shores. She just recently moved to Norton Shores. It's a beautiful community right on the lakeshore here in West Michigan. She moved there from Grand Rapids. Oh, she says the battle with deer is real here. Jill, I feel your pain. I'm just up the road from you, and Stacey and I have already talked about it. She says, I have a very large front yard, and I want a berm to break it up. So looking for some deer-resistant plants that are good for this area. Stacey, I think you'll have some great suggestions because you deal with the deer issue also.
And do I ever? And, for many years, I had a radio show on Sirius, and people would call and say, oh, I have a deer problem. And I would rattle off a list of plants that I read were deer resistant. And I really want to apologize to those listeners because I did not have the firsthand experience that I have now and the firsthand knowledge that deer resistance is a very tricky thing. So I will tell you, Jill, that I'm going to give you a little short list of plants right here that I know from my firsthand experience that are pretty much unbothered by deer. But I'll also put more on our show notes. So gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. But yeah, you can take my word for it and that when I say something is deer resistant, it means that in my little 1/4 acre city lot, the herds of 7 to 9 deer have still not touched it. So let's see, there's a number of things. I've kind of just totally changed my garden to just not have things that they eat anymore, things that I used to try to grow. So I really have it sort of narrowed down. So lilacs are a really good choice. Now, I find that lilacs...
Really?
Yes. They don't eat the flowers.
I'm looking forward to your list because the buck stops with you, Stacey. Go ahead. Let's hear this.
So does the dough. So lilacs have done very well, and I have a number of lilacs. Now, one thing you want to be careful with, and this is true not just of lilacs, but any time that you are planting something new in an area with a lot of deer, is you have to be really careful when the plants are new from the garden center, and particularly if they're small. Because even if a plant is deer resistant once it gets a little bit more established, when they're young and when they're tender from the garden center, they're all juiced up, full of water and fertilizer. The deer are much more likely to try them, if not eat them, than an established plant that's much woodier and stringier.
Sure.
So you can try lilacs, but you're going to want to make sure that you're protecting them. Junipers are a great choice for a hedge in a deer-ridden area. So I actually just planted a hedge of junipers a few weeks ago. Because there's no way you could grow arborvitae, which of course is the classic hedge plant and one that deer just absolutely adore.
Devour it.
Yes. So junipers are a great choice. Now, you might think, okay, I know junipers, they're prickly. That's probably why deer don't eat them. But as you no doubt know, Rick, deer love roses. So prickliness in and of itself is not necessarily a good indicator that something is going to be deer resistant. So Jill, please do steer clear of roses. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. And you also have to steer clear of hydrangeas because they don't do well. Now, I do grow some oak leaf hydrangeas, I think I mentioned last week, but they're tall enough that the deer don't really bother them too much. So a little bit of nibbling, but not too bad. But I have to have one hydrangea in my garden because I work for Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs, and I think I would lose my job if I didn't at least have one hydrangea in there. So I also grow a number of native perennials. One of the ones that does extremely well for me and never gets bothered by deer is Silphium perfoliatum, the cup plant. It is a very bold perennial. It gets to be about 8 to 10 feet tall, but they never bother it. And
can you say that botanical name again for
sorry.
folks who are keeping score at home? It just rolls off your tongue.
Yeah, sorry. And I'll put it in the show notes too. That's Silphium, Silphium perfoliatum. It's a very interesting native perennial that I really love. And they also tend not to bother, believe it or not, my summerific hibiscus.
Oh, I love it.
I love those too. And I have a number of them. And, sometimes I'll find a little bit of browsing on them at times during the season, but by and large, I do not have my display, damaged in any way. And similarly, Rose of Sharon, another type of hibiscus, they also nibble it just a little bit, but not really enough to cause any damage to the actual flowering show, display.
Sure. For my experience on the lake shore, for Jill from Norton Shores, Jill, ornamental grasses.
Oh, great choice.
The deer, leave them alone. The soil tends to be well drained. Let's put it that way, right?
To say the least.
For those of us who live along the lake shore. So ornamental grasses, nepetas, and Stacey, I love any of the alliums.
Oh, you can't go wrong with alliums.
You can't go wrong.
Is there anyone who doesn't love alliums?
I love
I have yet to meet someone.
And talk about a magnet for butterflies, and other pollinators. So
super easy to
that
grow.
would be my recommendation.
So,
yeah.
Jill, we could probably do an entire show on deer-resistant plants, but what we'll do is we'll link you to some great resources in the show notes so you have a chance to do all your research and make some good planting decisions.
That's the great thing about this show. Gardening Simplified onair.com, the show notes. Make sure to take a look, and we'll keep you posted. We also received an email that says my mom's friend Carol from the Detroit area texted me after the show and wanted to know if it was okay to plant hostas this fall.
Oh, yeah, that was actually me, my mom's friend Carol.
Your mom's
Yes.
friend Carol.
My mom's
Got
friend
the
Carol.
Connection.
She was asking me for some suggestions. She was planting a red, white, and blue garden, and the site had become more shady, and so the salvia that she had planted to fill in the blue was no longer doing well. And so she asked me if there was something that she could plant instead that would give her blue, and I gave her a number of suggestions. But one of the things is if you want that red, white, and blue look, the flowering is only going to last a little bit, a short amount of time. So I suggested that she plant blue hostas, which are going to provide that blue color all season long. And so she got real excited about that idea. And so she's like, can I plant them now? And so the answer is absolutely yes. Now is a great time to plant just about anything in most areas. So I actually, we get so many questions about planting in fall, not just shrubs, but perennials and trees and everything else. So I actually recently wrote a fall planting FAQ. That's going to answer all of your conundrums and quandaries about fall planting. So you can definitely read that. We'll link that in the show notes, of course, on gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. And so, Carol, as I already told you, because of course I replied to her texts, yes, now is a great time to plant hostas. So it's a great time also to take advantage of those end of season sales.
Oh, boy. Get a green thumb from handling that currency. You're saving cash. A great time of the year to plant. Yes, fall. There's a reason they say fall is for planting. Soil's nice and warm after summer. We get natural rainfall. It's a great time to establish plants in the landscape. And in the case of hostas, like Arnold Schwarzenegger would say, hasta la vista, baby, or whatever it is, right? So let's go for it.
That's what those hostas will be saying in about, another month or
Yes,
so.
Exactly. Jane writes to us, says, after 4 seasons of my amaryllis, a.k.a. Amy, I like that. Blooming beautiful in March, I again this June trimmed spent bloom stalks and put her outside until fall. And much to her surprise, bloomed again in August. Do you think the amaryllis, or Amy, she will have the strength to bloom again in spring?
So this is a great question. And I also want to say that Jane sent a picture of her beautiful amaryllis. And so I will put that in the show notes so everybody can see it. Now, it's not totally unusual for amaryllis to bloom twice, but it does mean, Jane, that you're doing everything right. So I just want to give you a quick overview of an amaryllis's seasonal cycle so you can understand what happens. So basically, when most people get an amaryllis, it's the holidays. It starts to grow right away. So an amaryllis is going to grow and flower in about 6 to 8 weeks from when it starts to sprout. Then what you're going to give it is about 8 weeks to go dormant. And during that 8-week period, you're still watering it, but less. And it's taking the nutrients in its foliage and translocating them into that big old amaryllis bulb.
Like it.
It's translocating them in there to store them as sugars and to basically build up strength for the next flowering. So it gets that 8-week period where it's withering back. And then if it has 8 weeks of dry dormancy, so it's more or less completely dry, that is basically going to make it say, oh, hey, I'm back where I started from. Time to start another bloom cycle. So what you're doing is really just simulating that. And as long as you continue to, hit those same benchmarks, those 6 to 8-week benchmarks, it will continue to flower. And it should flower for you just fine again next spring. It's totally normal for it to get 2 blooms a year. So we'll put some more resources in the show notes, and you'll find that at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. And we will be back with Rick's branching news.
Welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show with Stacey Hervella and me, Rick Weist. It's time for branching news. Stacey, in our first segment, we talked about nutsedge, and I saw a report this past week. A harmful plant disease has been identified for the first time in nutsedge, which could be a threat to agricultural and ornamental crops. Again, back to that phytoplasma thing, as I call it, the Ghostbusters thing. You understand it better than I do, but that's a big deal that would be should we call it host?
Yes, it is a host. So phytoplasmas are just super duper bizarre. They don't really fall neatly into any of the like normal classifications of organisms. It's not a bacteria. It's not a fungus. It's not a virus. It's a phytoplasma. And it's not that they exist in the plant or they just pop up in the plant, but the phytoplasma lives in the gut of an areophyid mite, which is a teeny, teeny, tiny little mite. Like you can't even see them. And then the mite feeds on the plant, and this phytoplasma in its gut goes into the plant and causes it to do all sorts of weird things. And I was reading the article about the nutsedge, and it says that it causes them to produce extra leaves instead of flowers. And then if something has a phytoplasma and a mite feeds on it, then it can spread it to another susceptible plant. So
wow.
Yeah.
And there's so much nutsedge out there.
Yes.
So the problem just compounds on itself.
It absolutely can. So this one is definitely new, and it remains to be seen.
Yikes.
But a lot of people are familiar with phytoplasmas, whether or not they know it, because that is what is responsible for rose-rosette disease. And a lot of people know about that.
Well, as Dr. Peter Venkman, Bill Murray in the Ghostbusters movie would say, I'm fuzzy on the whole good-bad thing. What do you mean by bad? But we'll leave the science to others. At least I'll leave the science to others. Also in not breaking, but branching news, I picked up this past week that olive oil may be a problem. Olive oil producers have been hit hard because of drought in Spain, and Spain's olive oil harvest this year, Stacey, could be down significantly.
Oof, that is very, very bad news because I use a lot of olive oil.
Mm-hmm.
It's expensive enough as it is. And of course, it's awful for all of the people who are experiencing that drought and all those farmers who rely on it. Fortunately, the trees will survive because olive trees are very, very drought tolerant. But the issue comes in so many cases the quality of the crop.
Yeah, and heat and drought in areas like France, Spain, Italy, Portugal this past year has created this problem. So, we continue to hear of drought problems around the world or here in the United States and California causing some real plant problems.
Yes, and then that very often, unfortunately, causes food problems. So it pays to be aware of the branching news.
Now, talking about people and our health, aside from plant health, picked up this past week, a study done in Germany, reported by Medical News Today, says that taking a walk in nature is a great preventative measure against developing mental health problems, or at least significantly reduces your stress. So taking a walk in a nearby park, or maybe your backyard, which you're now busy planting based on the inspiration and kick in the plants we've given you on this show, the Gardening Simplified Show. And Stacey, I'll tell you what, taking a walk in the woods or in nature or being surrounded by plants, I believe for me, my mental health, it makes a difference. Do you buy into these studies?
I 100% do. As I have gone through life, I have often found that there are very few problems that a good walk outside can't cure. And that is, that's even true when things start to go dormant and you're, just being in nature, fresh air, it just gives you perspective and, it really helps to divert your mind and give you fresh perspective. And that's what problem solving and mental health is all about. So, unless the problem is like you've got a broken knee, there's really a walk in the woods or even in your own backyard is definitely a great idea.
It makes all the difference in the world. Also in branching news, firefighters in the UK recently happened upon a cow in a sticky situation. Of course, we live in a social media world, and so somebody will post a picture. And in this case, the cow got its head wedged inside a tree. Have you ever heard that before?
No, and the mental image that that this is conjuring up right now is really something I'm sure the listeners feel. Do we know what kind of tree it was?
I looked at the picture. It looked like a sycamore to me, but I'm not sure. And its head got wedged in this tree. It couldn't go anywhere. It was not amusing
I knew there was going to be
Sorry.
I knew some kind of moo thing was coming. I was trying to beat you to it, but I just couldn't think of a tree with moo in it fast enough.
He's standing there and he's stuck in the tree. He's put out to pasture, so to speak. But good news, the firefighters rescued this cow. The cow is fine and is no worse for the wear, but that's something you don't see every day.
Was there a picture with the with this article that shows? Was it the cow freed from the sycamore, or was the cow still in the sycamore?
Was the cow still in the sycamore
So did
tree?
it just have like an injury or like one of those big kind of holes in it, and that was how the cow?
Yeah, just one of these V-shaped, two big branches,
Oh,
V-shaped.
okay.
Got its head stuck in there.
I see. So like a yoke. I was thinking it was like a hole in there.
Exactly.
And it was, okay, gotcha. Okay,
Yes.
that is a much different mental image than I had before. So thanks for clarifying.
And when the firefighters arrived, the stakes were high.
Oh my God.
Sorry, Stacey. Okay, let's move
goes
on
out
to
like
more
this.
branching. Did you know, while we're on things humorous in the world of nature, of course, this time of the year, folks need to share their tomatoes and zucchini, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You can't use it all.
No, you cannot.
You can't use
I'm
it.
certainly, and Adriana, our producer, is laughing over there because she's also growing vegetables and she has been foisting them off to coworkers as well. So yeah.
Well, and in the fashion world, I noticed that you can now buy clothing that comes pre-stained with Heinz ketchup stains.
Okay, I looked at this article, and we will link this, of course, in the show notes because I'm sure that people are going to wonder what this looks like. And I'm not going to lie, I wasn't impressed.
It is amazing.
I was not. I don't get it.
Well, there's a large percentage of people who will look for clothing secondhand as opposed to purchasing it new. Well, this is new clothing, but they pre-stain it for you.
Oh, how convenient.
What a world we live in. I would have never expected something like that. I mean, that's, boy, I'm not even going to give you a bad pun here.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
it's kind of it kind of defies explanation. And you know, I'm questioning, of course, the wisdom of pre-stained ketchup clothing. But I did want to mention, we ran out of time in our garden mailbag segment, but I do want to just remind listeners, if they have questions for us, we would be happy to answer them. All you have to do is email help@gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. Or just go to gardeningsimplifiedonair.com and click the contact form, and that will go right to us. So please do keep those questions coming. And while you're there, check out the show notes so you can see the picture of the cow with its head in the tree and the ketchup-stained clothing.
Oh, my. I tell you what, we're going to learn a lot on this show, and we thank you for tuning in to the show. Again, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. Stacey, I love the website because it's really going to help us be interactive with our listeners.
And, you know, it's when you're listening, you hear so many things and you're maybe driving, you don't have time to write them down. You just want to kind of stick them away, file them away mentally. So this is an opportunity for you to go back there and get all of those resources in one convenient place.
There you go. And send those pictures, too. Love pictures. Love to see those pictures.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm going to post Jane's beautiful amaryllis picture, and it's almost amaryllis season. So if other listeners do want to get their own amaryllis and get their own 2 blooms a year, now would be the time to start thinking about that.
Stacey, it's a pleasure and a privilege to do this show with you. I want to personally thank Adriana. Thank you very much. And John Ilk back at the studio.
Yes, Rick, it's always a pleasure, and I had a great time today, and I hope everybody learned something. I know I sure did, and we are going to see everybody again next week.
I'm sure hoping so, and in the interim, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. Have a great week.